Government elaborates on civil service retirement age extension plan. In the US, a shooting incident near the vice president's home. And Obama to push for tax reform in his State of the Union address.
Hello and a very good evening. The government admitted today that extending the retirement age for civil servants to 65 will affect promotional prospects in the government workforce. And new recruits will need to resign if they wish to retire at age 60. Owen Fung reports.
The chief executive announced in his policy address that the government has decided to extend the retirement age for civil servants by 5 years. The new arrangement will be applicable to new recruits. Some lawmakers are concerned about how this will affect promotional prospects.
What has the administration done to make sure that the right person can get promoted? If there are more people retiring, then of course they would be able to vacate their posts for the junior officers to get promotions. But then if they retire a bit later, then of course that would also affect the progression ladder.
Other lawmakers questioned whether new civil service recruits would be allowed to retire at 60, the current retirement age.
When they reach 60, can they apply for early retirement? Would you approve their retirement on a discretionary basis? Well, they have to resign. Under the new system, they have no choice as regards retirement age.
Current civil servants can extend their retirement age subject to the approval of the management of the department. To address concerns that this arrangement could lead to favoritism, the government says it will institutionalize the selection process. But a number of lawmakers remain unconvinced.
I have dealt with many civil service disputes in the past. Very often, even if there are guidelines, they would have ways to go about it. After the selection committee has taken a decision to ask some civil servants to stay, then in the Civil Service Bureau, we would then review the decision to see if it's an objective and reasonable one.
A new post-retirement contract scheme was also introduced in the policy address, allowing departments to hire retired civil servants on contract terms. The administration says those hired under the scheme can continue to receive their pension. Owen Fung, TVB News.
The government's new Green Form home ownership pilot scheme, which will allow public housing tenants to buy new public housing units, is raising calls for tighter resale restrictions. Transport and Housing Chief 19Jan2015 said today he will listen to all views and hopes to announce details of the scheme by the end of the first quarter. Rani Samtani has more.
The new pilot scheme proposed in the policy address will allow public housing tenants to buy newly built public housing units at prices set at a lower level than those of home ownership scheme flats. But will there be restrictions on the resale of these flats? Prices of public housing units previously sold to tenants have recently hit record highs in the secondary market. This lady said the resale restriction period should be 10 to 25 years. Secretary for Transport and Housing 19Jan2015 said he understands that there are concerns. He noted that some public housing flats and home ownership scheme flats have been sold at higher prices. Zhang explained that it's the owner's choice how to use the unit after paying the land premium to the housing authority. He said it is a complex situation and he will listen to all views on the matter. Members of the Housing Authority suggested that there should be a longer resale restriction period and that the flats should only be resold to public housing tenants. Wang Xing-chi said such flats should not be resold within 2 or 3 years of the purchases. Otherwise, there could be speculation on the prices of these flats. Zhang said he hopes to work out the details of the scheme with the Housing Authority within the first quarter of this year. He added that they will discuss possible housing sites, set eligibility criteria, and decide whether to strengthen resale restrictions. Rani Samtani, TVB News.
Well, tender for the 6th phase of Lohas Park closed today. The maximum number of flats has been raised by 50% to more than 2,000 units. But a district councillor has criticised the MTR Corporation for failing to ensure that residents are provided with the facilities that they need. Stephanie Choi has the story.
The MTR Corporation says it's received 7 applications for tender for the 6th phase of Lois Park near Chung Kwan O. The latest phase will provide up to 2,400 flats, up 50% from the 1,600 units provided in the 5th phase. Surveyors believe the greater number of units means building smaller flats, providing more incentive to developers. Right now, about 30,000 residents live in Lois Park. There aren't any wet markets or eateries around, just 2 supermarkets, 1 dry cleaners, a clinic and a childcare center. Before I moved in, I was told there was going to be a mall, a wet market and so on, but I saw none of that, this resident says. And this lady says she has to go to Chung Kwan O to buy daily necessities. Cycling District Councillor Christine Fong said developers have promised to build a large mall for the estate. But the designated plot of land for the mall is still vacant. Residents were supposed to get their mall last year, but now they'll have to wait until 2018. That's a 4-year delay, she said. Fong said it's irresponsible of the MTR Corporation to team up with developers, but then have no proper planning. She also said she hopes the MTR Corporation can perfect transport within the district and increase the frequency of trains going back and forth between Lois Park and Chung Kwan O so residents can have easier access to malls. Stephanie Choi, TVB News.
Well, China's stocks suffered their biggest one-day percentage drop since the global financial crisis. The country's main indices in Shanghai and Shenzhen both fell nearly 8%, their biggest losses since June 2008. The plunge wiped out around $315 billion of market value from the Shanghai Stock Exchange, the country's biggest. Analysts say the fall comes after the country's securities regulator imposed margin trading curbs on several major brokerages, a sign authorities are worried about the market's big gains. The dive across the border rubbed off here in Hong Kong as well, where the Hang Seng Index fell 1.5% to close at 23,738.
Turning overseas now, heavy security is now guarding U.S. Vice President Joe Biden after gunshots were fired from a vehicle near his Delaware home Saturday night. The U.S. Secret Service confirmed shots were fired on a public road outside Biden's home. But he and his wife were not there at the time and no one was injured. Shortly afterwards, a man driving a vehicle tried to pass a police officer in the same area and was arrested for resisting arrest. Local police believe he's not the suspect they're looking for. The incident occurred as the Secret Service tries to recover from a series of security lapses. In September, a knife-wielding man jumped the White House fence and ran into the president's official residence. When U.S. President Barack Obama delivers his State of the Union address this Tuesday, it will be his first with both houses of Congress under Republican control. As Sonia Artero reports, while Republicans are poised to set their own agenda, the president is moving full steam ahead with plans to reform taxes.
President Obama will deliver his State of the Union address before a joint session of Congress Wednesday, 10 a.m. Hong Kong time. In it, he'll lay out a new scheme to reform the nation's tax code. This one calls for raising the capital gains rate on top income earners. That means couples making more than $500,000 US a year would have to pay a 28% tax rate versus the current 23.8%. Revenue generated by these changes would fund new tax credits for middle-class families and increase revenue by $320 billion US over the next decade. Knowing Republicans would control Congress for his final 2 years, Obama quickly pushed through some controversial moves.
He has boldly changed our policy with Cuba. It certainly irritated people that were for the embargo. He's used the executive authority to stop the deportations, and that's very controversial.
Some insist for the duration of his presidency, Obama's hands will be tied.
Well, the president's a double lame duck president. He is not only in his last 2 years of his administration, but he has divided party government. When you have divided party government, the opposition party controls the leadership, the agenda on the Hill, it's very hard to get anything done.
But this expert insists such a predicament has only emboldened the president.
I think he's going to feel empowered because he sees that with his immigration decision, his decision on Cuba, that the American people like decisiveness. They like action.
Other key items Obama hopes to roll out include strengthening cybersecurity laws to shield the U.S. from hacking. He also wants new law enforcement measures to deter police brutality and to address violent extremism in the aftermath of the Paris shootings. Sonia Artero, TVB News.
Funerals have been held for the policewoman who was killed in last week's attacks in Paris, as well as one of the gunmen who attacked the Charlie Hebdo newspaper office. James Aiken reports.
More than 1,500 people paid their respects at the funeral of policewoman Clarissa Jean-Philippe on the Caribbean island of Martinique. The 26-year-old was gunned down by Amadé Coulibaly on the south side of Paris. On the same day, 2 other men attacked the offices of French satirical newspaper Charlie Hebdo. A day earlier, in a very different atmosphere, one of those gunmen was buried in his hometown just north of Paris. The mosque's co-founder said Sharif Kouachi was buried in an anonymous grave away from the public eye in order to maintain calm. Elsewhere in Paris, Muslims gathered at rallies on Sunday to show their support to tackle terror attacks. But many also condemned the stigmatization of Muslims and Islam, as well as the publication of controversial cartoons by Charlie Hebdo.
On sent qu'il y a aujourd'hui de plus en plus.
A Muslim leader said there is a growing feeling of increased Islamophobia, and he criticized politicians for not doing more. French authorities, meanwhile, banned an anti-Islamist demonstration in Paris planned for Sunday, ruling that it might disrupt public order. In Pakistan and Afghanistan, protesters continue to show their opposition to the newspaper and the French government.
We will agitate again and again, and we hope government of France will take appropriate action against the culprits.
During a visit to Washington, Britain's Prime Minister emphasized that while the security threat appears to keep changing, the problem remains the same.
But it's still based on the fundamental problem of a poisonous death cult narrative, which is the perversion of one of the world's major religions. And that's the thing we're still up against.
Meanwhile, in Belgium, which remains on its second highest alert level, anxious locals contemplate the sudden change of scenery on their streets.
It's good that we got some people, like, checking a bit to the sensitive places like the Jewish Museum, but otherwise, I just hope they won't stay a long time.
James Aiken, TVB News.
And still to come in our news tonight. A call for more transparency from petrol station operators. Intense fighting around the Donetsk airport in eastern Ukraine. And the Pope wraps up his visit to the Philippines.
What is stress?
So it's a whole body response to a mental thought.
What can Olympic athletes teach us about coping with stress and failure?
Instead of focusing on the result, just focus on what you can do right now.
Tonight, Super Bodies, Super Stressed, at 9:30 on Pearl.
When you travel well, you broaden the mind. Cathay Pacific. Life well traveled.
咪俾睇唔見嘅甲醛破壞你嘅家庭幸福。立邦金裝抗甲醛正味全效，分解有害甲醛，轉化成水分子，仲超級抗菌。金主，捍衛家人健康，我的靈感，我的立邦。
Stairs. My lung has broken out of prison. Our only hope is the Dragon Warrior.
The pan.